Putin moves goalposts and Washington continues to react. I just asked U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio whether the U.S. is putting the pressure of a deadline on Putin to make him do what Trump wants. At his press conference here in Antalya, Rubio basically dodged my question. Instead of talking timelines, he called for a Trump-Putin summit as the only way to make progress. This is the Americans' latest demand of Putin, replacing the possibility of Putin-Zelensky summit this week, which the Ukrainian president proposed and Putin ignored. The president's willing to stick with this as long as it takes to achieve peace. What we cannot do, however, is continue to fly all over the world and engage in meetings that are not going to be productive again, said Rubio. He added that the only way now for a breakthrough was by Trump sitting face-to-face with President Putin and determining once and for all whether there's a path to peace. This is yet another shift in the U.S. position. The administration has gone from first demanding an immediate month-long truce to conceding to Moscow's far more limited ceasefire proposal, which never materialized, to last weekend deflating a European ultimatum for Putin to agree to a 30-day truce by the start of this week. And then finally backing Putin's proposal instead for Russia-Ukraine talks in Istanbul today, which so far have not happened. Each call by the Americans for Putin to deliver has ended in him successfully moving the goalposts. Washington is once again setting no deadline on the latest shifting objectives. No breakthrough in war unless Trump meets Putin, Rubio. More now from Rubio, who says he doesn't expect a breakthrough in the conflict unless President Donald Trump is directly involved in the negotiations and engages with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He says this is important to determine what the Russian side wants and if peace is possible. In the pre-recorded press briefing, Rubio says the level of the team sent by the Russian side does not indicate a breakthrough. Rubio, I don't have high expectations for upcoming Ukraine peace talks. Earlier, we said we'd bring you a statement from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which had been delayed. We're now receiving a recording of that news conference during which Rubio says he doesn't have high expectations for talks between Ukraine and Russia. He has also confirmed that he will be meeting with the Turkish foreign minister and Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul on Friday. U.S. top diplomat speaking now. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has just begun giving a news conference in Turkey. We can expect to hear more about those Ukraine-Russia peace talks and how his day at a meeting of NATO allies has gone. We'll bring you his key comments as they come, and you can follow along by pressing "Who will be leading the Ukrainian delegation at Istanbul peace talks?" As we've been reporting, Zelensky confirmed a bit earlier today that he would be sending a high-level delegation to Istanbul for potential talks with Russia, and it would be led by his defense minister, Rustem Umerov. But who is Umerov? The Ukrainian defense minister's appointment to the role back in 2023 was of note, as he is a Crimean Tatar and a Muslim. This was seen as a signal that the country was serious about returning Crimea to Ukraine, which Russia annexed back in 2014. The 41-year-old is a government official who previously headed Ukraine's state property fund, but is best known for negotiating with Russia and for organizing successful prisoner exchanges. He is an active member of the Crimean Tatar ethnic community and has tried to reinstate its cultural identity and its place in the world. News conference with U.S. top diplomat delayed, published at 17:36:15 May. 17:36:15 May. We're now hearing that the planned news conference with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been delayed. He has spent the day at an informal NATO meeting where he has been talking to his counterparts in countries such as the UK, Germany, and France. We'll stay across these updates and bring you more when we get them. 3 key meetings across Turkey. Who has been where today? We're expecting to hear from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio shortly, who has been meeting with his NATO counterparts in Antalya today. Foreign ministers gathered in Antalya for an informal meeting of the Defense Alliance, with smaller groups also holding separate discussions. Elsewhere in Turkey, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the country's capital, Ankara. But it was in Istanbul we had expected to see the most action today, with Russian and Ukrainian delegates due to meet for the first face-to-face talks since 2022. The talks appear to still be on the cards, although neither Putin nor Zelensky are set to attend, with precise details on timing not yet confirmed. U.S. top diplomat to speak shortly. Shortly, we're going to hear U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio address journalists in Antalya after meeting NATO foreign ministers in the Turkish city throughout the day. We'll bring you his key comments here soon, and you can also follow along by pressing Rubio tells diplomats Europe's involvement is critical for peace talks. As we've been reporting, there are 3 separate cities across Turkey where world leaders and foreign diplomats are meeting to discuss the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We can now bring you some details of the talks U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had with European foreign ministers while he was attending the NATO meeting in Antalya earlier today. U.S. government spokesperson Tammy Bruce says foreign ministers from Italy, France, Germany, and the UK all agreed with the U.S. on the need to increase NATO burden sharing and increase European defense spending. The statement adds that Rubio briefed the ministers on Trump's efforts to stop the war, while underlining that European leadership is critical for negotiations. Russia ready to discuss possible compromises. Delegation leader. We can now bring you some more lines from the Russian delegation that is in Istanbul for peace negotiations with Ukraine. As we just reported, Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky has been addressing the media in Istanbul. He says Russia considers the talks in Istanbul as a continuation of the last face-to-face talks held between Ukraine and Russia in 2022. Medinsky says Russia is ready to discuss possible compromises and is in a working mood. He adds that his delegation, which Zelensky earlier called low-level, consists of chief officials of all relevant authorities. We are ready for possible compromises, Russian delegation leader. Meanwhile, as President Zelensky has just finished taking questions from reporters in Ankara, we've just finished hearing from the Russian delegation that's in Istanbul. Russian delegation leader Vladimir Medinsky says that Russia is ready to discuss the resumption of talks in Istanbul. We are ready for possible compromises. We're ready to discuss them, he adds. He reiterates that the delegation are minded to work. For context, President Zelensky said moments ago that he is sending his defense minister to lead talks in Istanbul out of respect for Trump and Turkish President Erdogan. 5 key details from Zelensky's address in Turkey. Over the last few minutes, we've been bringing you lines from President Zelensky, who addressed the media after meeting Turkish President Erdogan. Here are the main points he made. Zelensky confirmed he would be sending a high-level delegation led by his defense minister to Istanbul to hold talks with Russia and the U.S. Russia is sending a low-level delegation, Zelensky said, as he suggested that Russia was not treating the peace talks seriously. The timing of the meeting, however, remains unconfirmed, but Zelensky underlined that Ukraine remains ready for direct negotiations. He called for further pressure and more sanctions to be used on Russia. The Ukrainian president also pointed out that, although Putin proposed direct negotiations, he has not attended in person. He does not want a ceasefire, he said. There will be no surprises at Istanbul peace talks. Zelensky. In his closing remarks, Ukraine's president stresses that his country is not the aggressor in this war and highlights how Kyiv has offered to make compromises through many diplomatic channels. Ukraine has many conditions, he says, adding that if the country and Russia can agree on an unconditional ceasefire, then Ukraine will accept it. But a ceasefire cannot be unilaterally decided by one party in a war, and more pressure should be directed at Russia, Zelensky says. Before ending the news conference, the Ukrainian president again says that his delegation will be in Istanbul today and tomorrow to ensure there are no surprises at the peace talks. With that, Zelensky finishes speaking. Stick with us as we bring you the key lines and some analysis. Zelensky. Trump has demonstrated political will. Why can't Putin? Published at 1529, 15 May. 1529, 15 May? The Ukrainian president is now reminded of some comments that Russia's foreign minister made about him earlier. In those comments, Sergei Lavrov called him pathetic in response to Zelensky's earlier comment that Putin had sent stand-in props to Turkey. Zelensky addresses this by asking why Putin proposed direct negotiations himself. He does not want a ceasefire, he says, adding that the Russian president can't say, "Let the ceasefire begin." The Ukrainian president also notes that U.S. President Donald Trump indicated that he was prepared to join talks, demonstrating good political will. War cannot end without a ceasefire, Zelensky says, published. We are continuing to bring you lines from Ukrainian President Zelensky's news conference in Ankara, Turkey, after his meeting with President Erdogan. Zelensky says if there are no talks about a ceasefire, then the war cannot be brought to an end. He tells the assembled reporters that Russia is demonstrating that it does not want to end the war, calling for more pressure to be applied on the country from developing nations as well as from allies of Ukraine. The Ukrainian leader adds he expects more sanctions to be leveraged against Russia in order to help end the war. Don't forget to like and subscribe.